All right. Weekly scrap. Number 47, Firehouse Vigilance. Corley Moore here. This week's scrap was scheduled with a guest, and he had to cancel. Of course, it is emergency services. We are firefighters, and if there's one thing we can count on, it is for sure that we will have interruptions and schedules that we cannot count on. So, for that being said, you get stuck with me this week, and I really was just going to skip the scrap and wait for the guest next week. But today rolled around, and it's just tough. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit on this scrap, and then go over some things that I've had on my brain for a little bit. And yeah, very exciting lineup of guests for September. Had Benjamin Martin on last week. Unbelievable. The guy's a stud. If you haven't seen him, go listen to that. Download the podcast or check it out on YouTube or here on Facebook. Unbelievable. Coming up next week, we got Jonathan Brumley. That is going to be exciting. That's on the 16th of September. On September 22nd, it's the first double, and that's Jason Patton is going to be on in the morning. He is the bald guy from Fire Department Chronicles. I say the bald guy because that guy has more expressions in his face than anybody I've ever met. So it's going to be exciting to have him on and talk about that. And that evening, like I said, the first double header, John Lovato is going to be on talking about culture and Firehouse and leadership. It's going to be a good September. And then closing out September, Chief Dennis Riley is going to be on and talking. And so September's action-packed. And, of course, I've got very exciting time. October is already jam-packed and full. I got my first international guest with Lars Axelson coming on, plus a whole Gary Lane, David LeBlanc, Mike Walker, Aaron Quinn. It is going to be a good time. So, all that hype being said, everyone watching live, if you have questions for me about any topics whatsoever, any topic I put up, please do not hesitate to bring them up. I love hearing them from you, and that makes the scrap so exciting is the interaction. So with all that being said, let me get my notes here adjusted so I can see them well. I got all that said. Yes, October's looking action-packed. Here we go. Wasn't even going to talk about this today, but it's hard not to, and it's never forget. That day, I had 4 years on the fire department, and I still remember, just like all of us probably that were alive or old enough to remember, where they were that day. My wife came in and said, a plane just flew into a building in New York City. And I was like, holy crap, that's a tragedy, and is it serious? I'm thinking a Cessna into like the side of an office building or something at the time. So kick on the news at the time. I don't even think we had cable at that time, so it was the local news. And sat there watching when that second plane hit the tower. And that moment of dawning comprehension when you realize this is not an accident at all, that, and nothing really makes sense. And like I said, I had 4 years on the job, and I hadn't even really grown to appreciate how great this job was at that time. I was just a kid who thought he knew everything at that time. I was 24, 25 years old. So it was crazy how much that impacted me. Did not know anybody in New York City. Did not know anybody that died directly from it, and yet it still punched me in the gut. And I remember, and maybe it's because my dad was such a World War II buff. I have a massive love for World War II because of my father. But I always remember that, Pearl Harbor, the day that will live in infamy, it's always meant something to me. And I remember sitting there going, in the months that followed, not necessarily that day, but in the months that followed, going, people are going to forget about this, the way Pearl Harbor's just kind of become a footnote to modern history. Like, this is going to be and I told myself I'm never going to forget it. This was before the never forget became the mantra. And that's the reason why I only have 2 tattoos, but one of them is actually it's the very first tattoo I got, and it's a Maltese cross with the Roman numerals, because I never wanted to forget that and how much it punched me in the gut. And so every year this rolls around, the 9/11, you think about the never forget and what it means to you. And just last night I was on the phone talking to a fellow firefighter, and he is a phenomenal specimen of a human being. But we were talking about people who aren't into the job. And I believe Benjamin Martin even touched on this last week about people who don't love the job as much as you do. And, and I've always wrestled with this and I'll try to articulate it. I hope it comes across well in what I'm saying. Is that, yeah, there are people who aren't into the job as much as you. Because the discussion we had last night on the phone was, what do you do when someone this is a job that can kill you tomorrow. You could report to duty tomorrow, and this job, you might not come home from it. That's the job we do. We put ourselves in the line, in our lives on the line. So for other people, we take that oath. And some people, he goes, how do some people just ignore that? And they don't care, and they let their fitness go. They get complacent. They let their skills drop. And that's a great question. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? Someone who doesn't take it as serious as you do. And it's a number one question probably that I get, which is, I'm fired up. I'm into the job. I like to work out. I like to hit the training ground, but my insert whatever, my crew, my captain, my senior guy, they don't want me to. They're telling me to chill out. They're making them look bad. What do you do with that? That's a tough question, man. And so one of the things that I've always wrestled with was everybody that went up those towers that day, that went up there to try and stop that fire, went up there to try and evacuate all those people, everybody that ran towards the danger, were every one of those guys, the guys that were 100% checked in, 100% best shape, 100% into the job, every one of the 343, were they the guys that were just 100% plugged in? And I know this, that every one of them was a hero, and that's kind of what I struggle with, is how do you, because there's no excuse for not being, for being lazy or complacent or inept or not into the job. But at the same time, if you're looking at a brother going, that guy's not as into the job as me, but he's still willing to crawl into the fire. And so how do I make that make sense into a way that meshes those two worlds? And so when I say, I don't know, everybody that, like I said, every last one of them was 100% an American hero that day. And so when I look at someone who's not as into the job as me, you got to look at him and say, that's my brother. And you can, if you're one of those guys who's super checked in, super plugged in, super into working out and being fit and hitting the training ground and doing everything you can do, if you're one of those guys, you really have two options you can do. You can climb up on your ladder and look down your nose at those others and say, you're not good enough for my fire service because I decide who's here and who's not. And, or you can stretch your hand out to him and say, what can I do to bring you along the way? And I know not all of them will check in. Some of them will just mock you, knock the hand away, whatever. They're your brothers. And that's a big part of kind of how it hits me when on this day is, how do we cross that gap? And I don't know if it makes sense what I'm trying to say. So everyone, if you're on duty today or off duty, I know that not everybody in the fire service gets along, man. And that's just facts and part of it. But when you see that guy walking down the hall, grab him and hug his neck and tell him you love him, because know that he will go towards the fire with you if the tones drop right now. That's the guy that's going with you. That is your brother. And so hug his neck, tell him you love him. And that is part of what Never Forget means to me and how it's affected my life. So I wanted to talk about that just briefly. I hope it made sense, because I'm not even sure I'm clear in my own head about it. So talking about it out loud, I hope it came across. So going from that, man, I want to move on to topic of the day. The beautiful Miss Glass said that with my book being out, I should try and talk about some of the topics that are in the book. And I'm not really good at hyping myself or talking about stuff that I've done. And so for me, that's tough. But I do know that if someone cancels or I have an opening in the schedule for the weekly scrap, I am going to take the time to pick one of the topics in here and talk about it. Because an interesting thing about this book, and I know I've talked to you guys before, it's just you read one. It's designed. The whole thing is designed so you can read the one page at the start of your shift. It's supposed to take you 2 or 3 minutes to read. And then the other page is the challenge you're supposed to fill out and try to complete, that day or the following days until you're back on shift. So with that being said, it was very challenging. It was very challenging to get everything I wanted to say about a topic onto that one page in the 250 word, kind of 275 word limit. And so there's a lot of stuff I want to say about some of these topics. So that's what I'm going to do when I do this is kind of break down a little more in depth on some of the topics. LJ Geist, my man, how are you doing, brother? He said, whether your crewmates are into the job or not, it better be our personal commitment to take care of one another. Yes, man. And that's it, man. You just articulated it really well in that sentence. Man, that is it. Our personal commitment to take care of one another. And not just the physical side of things and getting in the gym and all that, also the mental side of things and the toll this job can take, if we're not looking out for each other and staying plugged in. 100%. Thank you for that. So, day 1 of Challenger Leadership. The topic is reading. So I wanted to go over reading a little bit. I'm getting to day 1 here. There is no downside to knowledge, man. There is no downside to knowledge. Day 1, reading. So what do I want to say about it? First thing first, whenever I talk to firefighters about reading, like 90% of the time, I hear the same thing each and every time, which is, I'm just not a reader. I mean, I just don't read. Here's the deal, buddy. I don't like to read. I'm not a reader. Some form of that statement, I'm not a reader, I don't like to read, etc., etc., etc. Which when I hear that, to me, it's the equivalent of saying, I'm just not a worker-outer, or I'm just not an exerciser, And it blows my mind because no one starts working out for the first time and goes to the gym and benches 500 pounds, right? No one does that. At least maybe, unless they're a freak of nature. But my point is, no normal person does that. No, you go to the gym, where does it start? It starts with the bar. Your bench starts with the bar. If, maybe a couple tens on each end if you're lucky, if you've never worked out. And if you stick with it, if you go every day or, 3 times a week and throw that weight, it will eventually grow. You'll put 25s on each side. You'll put 45s on each side. If your goal is benching 500 pounds, you can eventually get there if you stick to it over time, put in the sets and put in the reps. And starting out is embarrassing. There is no doubt about it. A big reason why a lot of people don't get in there and start is they don't want to be the one in there lifting just the bar looking like a weakling. And ego is a huge part of the reason why people don't even start. And it's the same exact thing with reading. If you've never been a reader, if you're not a reader, if you are just not a reader, then you got to start just like you would in the gym with just the bar, man. Get yourself a book that you want to finish and stick to it day in, day out. Yes, it will be extremely slow at first. Yes, your comprehension will be low. Your speed will not be there. Your retention will not be there. But if you stick to it and do it day in and day out, you will eventually get to where you're throwing up heavy weight, where you're throwing up that 500 pounds. And so that's what I want to make the comparison to is you're not going to start off reading War and Peace day 1 and polishing through it and understanding it and comprehending everything that went on in the book. So that's the first thing I wanted to say is it takes time. Just like working out, you have to dedicate yourself to it and you have to go after it. And it's worth it because just like a muscle, it will grow. And if you stick to it, if you put in the sets and reps, if you decide you are going to be a reader, just like the same way you're going to decide you're going to bench 500 pounds, the speed, the retention, and the comprehension, all those things will come and you will be plowing through books in no time. So that's the first part about it I wanted to say. And the whole analogy towards going to the gym, which I use quite a bit. So it is not just about what you read either. This is another huge part that I really didn't get to go into at all in my book, which is when you read, there is so much more going on than just the topic that you're reading. Like when you pick up a leadership book, yes, it's awesome. You're learning all about whatever that author had to say about leadership. When you pick up a book on fire tactics, yes, it is unbelievable that you can learn, insert whatever name you want to say. Vincent Dunn, Chief Lasky, Frank Viscuso, whoever wrote whatever book on tactics, you can absorb their tactics, and that knowledge is stuff that you want to absorb. I get that. What I'm talking about is irregardless of the topic, you could be reading romance novels, and there are benefits towards reading that I want to discuss. And it's not just the material absorbed. It is literally just making you smarter. And it is the connection of synapse, just all this stuff going on in your brain that is actually you becoming smarter, from vocabulary to empathy to cognitive skills to deduction and reasoning to reducing stress. There is so much going on that reading helps with. So a big one is like when you're reading a just an action adventure novel, Tom Clancy novel, let's say, or insert whatever novel, even Twilight novels for all I care. But the fact of the matter is, you have to connect with those characters' emotions and how they're feeling and understand from their description what's going on. And that raises your empathy level. Even if it's only a small bit, each time you read books, your empathy level goes up, which improves your communication and improves how you interact with other people, even if it's only a minor, small effect. So that's just one small aspect of what reading can do. The brains of readers show increased connectivity in the left temporal cortex, the region responsible for language receptivity, even hours after you stop reading. And these studies suggest that reading can train the mind and boost neural function through a process that's similar to muscle memory. And so reading just has so many neurological and physiological benefits besides the actual material that is being absorbed. And another thing that I always like to talk about is when people say, yeah, I read that book, I listened to it on Audible. Listening to a book, don't get me wrong, you get the material when you listen to a book, especially if you're a really good listener. But it is not the same as reading a book because it throws out all of the other part that we were talking about here when it comes to reading. Increases empathy. The brains of readers, and read a book. And they say stuff like, oh, I read Deep Survival. I listened to it on Audible. And like I said, you get the information that's in the book, the facts and the stories, you get those, but you are not actually engaging your brain. It's more of a passive listening. It's somewhere between, you read the book on one end and you watch the movie on the other. Audible is kind of in the middle. So again, I'm not downplaying Audible. I use Audible all the time in my car. I'm listening to the Mission, the Men and Me right now in my car. And I just finished Grossman's on Combat on Audible. So I have nothing against Audible. And so if you enjoy listening to books, listen to them. You will get the information out of them that way. A big problem for me in listening to them is I don't have the ability to write down notes. And when I'm listening to it, it will spark something in my brain. And then I'll go down the rabbit hole in my own brain. And by the time I come out of my where I was at, I will have missed 5-10 minutes of the book, and I have to back it up and figure out where I was when I zoned out and started thinking about my own thing. So that's the big thing on reading. People who say I'm just not a reader, don't buy it. Get them a book, put it in their hands, tell them they need to read. It is literally doing bench pressing for your brain. It's not just about the material that you read. The topic matters for what you want to learn, but it does not matter for the development of your brain. Your vocabulary will grow. It has no choice. You will see words that you don't know what they are, but you'll see them in context, and you may not know exactly what it is, but it will be there stuck in your brain, and eventually, and you can go look it up if you so choose. Your cognitive skills increase, deduction and reasoning. All of these things are brought up, and the benefits of reducing stress. And one even minor thing, if you just try to read before you go to bed, just a minor benefit is if you're reading a book, you're not on your cell phone, man. And that's a huge bonus just going right before bed. There was a study done in 2009. I wish I had written down what the study was from, but it talked about if you read for 15 to 20 minutes, like when you're on your way to a job or work or something where you need to be using your brain, it helps you focus and you perform better mentally whenever you have read for 15 to 20 minutes, like en route to that job or en route to that exercise. So all those things, as you can tell, I'm a huge fan of reading. I preach it to people all the time. One big part of the weekly scrap is every guest I have on here, I ask them, what is a book that you suggest that firefighters should read? And almost without fail, every one of the guests I've had on here have been big time readers. So all that being said, yes, I'm a huge proponent of reading. That's a little bit of my ramblings on day one reading from Challenger Leadership. A little bit of what I was not able to include in the little blurb for the day. So I won't do this often to you guys, make you sit here and listen to me rattle on for 10, 15, 20 minutes without a guest to break it up. So that's all that being said. With that all being said, the next thing I wanted to say is a book that you should read, because I always try to include this in every scrap. And I had Mike and Ann on the actual show, and we talked about this book quite a bit then. But I've never had it be the suggestion for a scrap. And so I wanted to make sure it was a suggestion from the scrap, and that is The Challenges of a Firefighter Marriage by Mike and Ann Galliano. Unbelievable book. It is the definitive work on being married and in the fire service, and it touches on every topic you can imagine, from communication, infidelity, all the way to taboo topics, almost like pornography. And it is a great book if you want to have a strong firefighter marriage. So I will put a link to it. I'm working on, and that's what the next thing I was going to touch on is every time we have these scrap, I have a guest on, they suggest a book. It's awesome. And now I'm getting messages from people saying, hey, is there a place where I can see all the books that have been suggested by the guests on the scrap? So I'm working on a document that has every book from every guest, what podcast it was on, who the guest was, and what books they suggested. It's a very slow work in progress. I think I have the first 10 or so scraps done, and I will continue to add to it. So I posted it on Facebook. It's a link to just a Google Doc that has them all in there. And it links them to Amazon so you can buy them or just find them. And it links to the podcast so you can listen to what they had to say about it. So I'm excited about that little project. And other than that, I have the last bit of things I want to say to you guys, which are these. Not a big sticker guy. I don't really sell stickers or anything like that. But you can see these stickers that I got. Boom, Firehouse Vigilance. Yeah, let it focus. And so these are Firehouse Vigilance stickers. And they're not for sale or anything like that. What they are is they are bribes. I basically want reviews of this book, mine, on Amazon. If you will go and leave a review for my book, again, I can't tell you what review to leave. But if you've read the book, if you love the book, go to Amazon, leave a review. Tell me you left a review. I'll send you one of these kick-ass stickers from Firehouse Vigilance. That's my way of saying, please go leave me a review. I could use them. Other than that, stickers and reviews, added the suggested reading list. Guests coming up next week. Very excited. Like I said, Jonathan Brumley, Jason Patton, John Lovato, Dennis Riley. The scrap is looking awesome for September. I'm already starting to plug people into November, so it's booked up almost to the end of the year, and we're going to get into the holidays. So hopefully everything else starts calming down. We got an election coming up. I hope it comes and goes and everything is nice and calm and we get a little more, what's the right word? I hope a new normal can come soon, whatever that ends up looking like. So that's it. Weekly Scrap number 47, a very short one. Just me kind of giving you some of my thoughts, talking about a few topics. Other than that, guys, thank you for tuning in. I hope the tones stay silent unless it is burning. I will see you next week with Jonathan Brumley. Stay safe.